is Dr. Victoria Fitton. I wanted to be able to talk to you today a little bit about who I am to give you some context for this course on fairy tales, fantasy, and fables, and why that's important to me in terms of understanding children, and really adolescents and adults for that matter. I have a clinical assistant professorship in the School of Social Work where I work actually as an endowed professor in children's services. When I teach advanced practice courses in the master's program. And I also teach a specialized program in children and child treatment. On another note, I'm also practicing therapist. I have a private practice and I specialize in childhood sexual abuse. As well as that, I'm a registered play therapist supervisor. So my specialties not only are in trauma, but they're informed by the kind of practice I do with children. Partly because what I've discovered over a long period of time is that what happens with children informs how to work with adults and adolescents. When people have been traumatized, and really highly traumatized, when that happens, it sort of stops developmental growth at particular points in their time. I'm having a little bit of difficulty telling you coming up with how I want to tell you that, but one of the things that I want to bring up in the course is a little bit about attachment and a little bit about child development and a little bit about brain development. Because what happens with people when they've been highly traumatized, particularly at young ages, is that arrests development. Now that doesn't mean that they become completely arrested or dysfunctional. What it means is that there are parts of our personality or parts of the way that we're developing that that get called into question when we have that kind of trauma. So it might be learning, it might be emotions, it might be behavior. Now, one of the things that's really typical about what we do in a society about children and their behavior is that we say, well, they're acting out, they're a bad behavior. We're going to do behavior modification plans to help those kids. What I think is true, actually, and it's very different from that, is that behavior is a form of communication. So when a child's been traumatized, and think of a 3-year-old, a 2-year-old, a 4-year-old, even up to 6, 7, and 8, really little children, even pre-verbal, they don't have a lot of language even at 4 years old. They have language about what they eat and about what their everyday experience is, but a trauma is outside the purview of everyday experience. And so what it does is it just makes it so that we don't have language for what happens. If you can't talk about what happened to you, and if you can't express those feelings either, because children don't have a lot of understanding about how to communicate feelings, then what you're left with is acting it out, is to demonstrate how you feel. So they play out hard. That's anger. Certainly they're angry. That makes sense to me. So why in the world would we want to put a cap on that anger when what children are trying to do is to express it, to tell us, to communicate to us that they're enraged about what happened to them, or they weren't protected, or why wasn't somebody really there? What we need to do is to find out what the threads are behind that. What is it that the child's trying to communicate so that we can give them a path or an avenue of some sort of healing in that? It's one of the reasons I really love play therapy. It's why I love expressive therapies. Now, expressive therapies are those things that we do that are beyond communication. Art therapy, play therapy, drama therapy, puppetry, equestrian therapy, things working with animals, animal-assisted therapy, adventure therapy, those kinds of things. Because what they do is they take away the necessity for words and they give us ways to act. They give us ways to feel. They give us ways to be able to project onto the field what's happening in our lives. And if you're good at interpreting that, then you can help the child move along. Now you can easily see that if I can help a child move along, I can help an adolescent or an adult who's had a similar experience when they were younger and didn't have the healing opportunities that they needed, and now they're at a different developmental stage, but they haven't been able to heal from that particular trauma. They still have some things where they're stuck when they were younger, maybe an inability to talk. Or at least say that. I can't tell you how many times my clients say to me, I don't know what to tell you about that. I don't have words for that. I don't even know what my feelings are. No one's ever asked me that before. So that's really what's one of the things that's caused me to go on this path about fairy tales. Because when children connect to fairy tales, those themes or the things within that fairy tale tell stories about what it is that they wanted to be able to communicate. It's about symbol, it's about metaphor. And when children stay in the metaphor, it's much less frustrating or frightening for them to tell a story. So, for instance, when they tell a story with a puppet, they can speak for that puppet, and it's a little bit removed from what happens internally. They don't even realize that they're telling their story through the puppet. And that's one of the things that happens with fairy tales. The adventures, the experiences, the themes in fairy tales are very connective for children who have experienced any kind of loss, separation, trauma, and not even just that. Um, One of the things that happens for all of us is we have some what we would call primitive rage inside of us. That just simply comes from the idea that we're frustrated by not having everything that we want. That's true for everybody, but it starts from when we're a little child. One of the things that parents are supposed to be able to do is to help their children slowly develop a way of being disappointed with the world. So when a baby's born, we feed them immediately. We do immediate kinds of things to relieve their stresses and their pain and their needs. As that infant grows, we do that, but we sometimes have them wait a few seconds. And as they get older, they have to wait a few minutes or come with mommy while I get that for you. It's a little bit disappointing. We're introducing that all the time so that a child doesn't grow up believing that the world has an instant way of always meeting my needs, always doing what I need them to do. That's unrealistic. But at the same time, even though we're helping children grow into what's real and realistic for their coming life, we're also frustrating them. That narcissistic part of a child saying, my mom didn't really meet my needs. And so that brings up this kind of sense of rage. And part of the reason that that evolves is because children are highly dependent on their caregivers. I mean, completely so when they're infants, and still very much so during that toddler separation individuation stage. And so partly what happens is that because a child is completely dependent upon and in love with their mother, whoever that primary caregiver might be, psychically they can't afford to be angry at mother. And so they're angry at themselves or they're just angry at the world. And that's pretty much where that primitive rage comes at. I'm really, really mad at my mother for not meeting my need immediately. I wanted that candy. I wanted that candy bar. I wanted that cookie. I didn't get it. Now it's a very small example. It's really one example and it's a little thing, but when children have that happen to them over and over and over again, it creates this frustration. Of course, we grow up not realizing that we're really mad because we mask it by being social, by being socialized, by doing those things that we're supposed to do, sharing and taking care of other people and helping other people get their needs met, being nice, being kind, socially appropriate ways of looking at the world. But underneath it, it doesn't take a whole lot sometimes to trigger that, when you really, really, really want something and you don't have the money to get it. Now, I'm just trying to put that in case because one of the things I want you to remember about when you read a fairy tale, and I just told you how important it is for children to not only do they love their mothers, but they need their mothers. If you think about fairy tales, have you ever read a fairy tale that had a mother in it? And the answer is probably not. I think until Brave came out, we have never had a mother. We have wicked stepmothers. We have wicked queens. We have, bad people who come into that life, and that thing, but mother's not there. And so that little bit of remove helps the child then um, rationally be able to be angry at this person who has thwarted them. And that's one of the reasons fairy tales are really, really popular for children. So it's that kind of underlying influence that started my interest in fairy tales. So that leads me to say that one of the things you're going to have to remember to do is that Bruno Bettelheim book that I wanted you to get called Uses of Enchantment. That's going to set the stage for understanding part of what I'm saying, but how Bruno Bettelheim saw that years and years ago. He actually ran a clinic where they worked with autistic children. Some of the things, uh, his background has been called into question over the years. But what I want you to think about in terms of this book um, is really how it connects to kids. And I would assume that as you read it, and you'll be able to make those connections yourself with the fairy tales that you loved and the fantasy that you love and why that connects to you, why that's powerful. The other thing to remember is that every fairy tale has a different connection to each child and to each person who reads it. So it's very important to read a fairy tale multiple times to children. And they'll have favorite ones, and they'll want you to read those over and over again. And it's a good thing for us to do that for ourselves as well, because that's how we get to figure out what the symbolism is and what that means to us and what the metaphors are and how those stand out. Now, I love to read, and so one of the things I do is to read a lot, because what that does is help me be able to pick through those metaphors. As I've told you, when I work with people who have had a lot of trauma in their lives, they don't use a lot of language. And so I have to be really familiar with the stories that they're going to tell, what the expectable kind of outcome is for that, or what I might expect to hear in terms of a metaphor. And that's one of the reasons I love fairy tales. And people who are older, who've been highly traumatized, and so much so that their developmental lags are really severe, so that they find it very difficult to communicate. I worked with a woman one time who didn't speak to me for almost 3 years. She did pantomime sometimes. She'd be able to, when I would ask her what she did with all the profound feelings that she had, she'd pick up the corner of the carpet in my room and take a little broom from the playroom area, and she'd make a sweeping motion under the rug. It's a very profound kind of way to express something. And it was a way for her to be able to communicate something very big in a very short, little movement, actually. So that's part of what's playing out with fairy tales. Fantasy, fables. Fables, not so much. Fables have a moral. One of the things you'll read in Bruno Bettelheim is that fables give you the storyline and then they tell you what it's supposed to mean. That isn't as helpful to any of us. They're fun, and they, in a lot of ways, enhance other things that we're trying to learn. But whenever we're told what the meaning of something is, it denies us the ability to kind of think it through for ourselves or feel it through for ourselves, or you know what I'm saying. So that's why fairy tales are really wonderful. The endings of them are usually pretty wild, or they just sort of resolve, and children can make of that what they want. And they're usually pretty unusual. Now, the ones you're going to be familiar with are fairy tales that Disney has done and cleaned them up. Why I want you to read the original Grimm is because I want you to see what kids really need. We've done our children in the 20th and 21st century a disservice by cleaning up fairy tales as much as we have, because then it doesn't meet the emotional and psychological needs that they have. Now, I've been talking for a little while, so I think I'm going to be able to stop now, but I want to set that stage for that. I want you to remember to read the Bettelheim book. And then the other readings are posted on Desire to Learn, which has been opened. There's also some videos. When I was in Barbados, I shot some video. One is of a banyan tree, one is of taking a submarine tour, another one is of a big mushroom rock, and then there's a cave. And I want you to, as you watch those, and I apologize, some of them with my cell phone, I didn't realize how windy it was and what kind of noise it was making. So they're not professional, they're just clips, and I want you to look at those so you can start thinking about the idea that children's perceptions are very different than ours. And the necessity for being able to fantasize about what's going on in those spaces is really critical and necessary for them as they grow up. So if you have questions, I hope you email me. That's the best way to reach me. I'll always have my cell phone and and a computer with me wherever I go, so you can easily contact me. So there's also a help number with Desire to Learn. And Desire to Learn, I'm still learning, so we'll figure those kinds of things out as we go. Don't panic about that. So every Monday, the class will start for another week, and then you'll finish working on that by midnight on Sunday. And there's going to be a quiz. You just take it online, and it just grades automatically. And then the homework assignments, that's pretty much the biggest part of the course. And So these things are in the syllabus. I hope you kind of look at that week by week so you don't miss something that you'll need to do. Not everything that you have to do is listed in the weekly content. So for instance, when I want you to watch Snow White and the Huntsman or whatever, there are things that you need to watch on television or in a movie every week. So you'll have to make sure you look that up. And then there's the fantasy book I want you to read and to do a little bit of writing on that at the end. So I hope you enjoy the course, and I'll be talking to you again in more video, and I'll probably do some PowerPoint at some point. This week I'm not going to. I want you just to get yourself settled into the course and do that homework assignment, and then I'll evaluate at the end of the week how much time you've been spending. Since I'm so used to teaching at a master's level, I'm wondering how much I'm going to be able to adjust that. I don't mean adjust. It's just the expectations for doing a master's course has a lot of work in it. I have a lot of expectation for what you're going to do too, but I don't want to overwhelm you at the same time. So we'll evaluate that at the end of this week. So I hope you have a good week. I hope you enjoy the course, and you'll see me again soon.